Shalom to everyone. Shalom from Tel Aviv. It's nighttime here, but good morning to you guys. I will say that if anyone have told me about 10 months ago that I would be speaking to a group of people sitting in the US while being in Tel Aviv, I would probably laugh, but things changed quite a lot. And I do feel that the one thing that hasn't changed in this time of great change, the time of pandemic, is people's passion to literature and the way that literature can take people from different parts of the world and put them all together into this joint experience of reading something. So I'm happy to be with you today. And we will go into the roar of the desert, because I know you were supposed to be today in the desert, but I will start my journey in India. So I guess if you're already in Israel, it's not a lot to ask you to jump a little bit forward and to get to India, because this is where Waking Lions, my novel, actually started. It happens in the Israeli desert, but it started in the Himalayas, in the mountains of the Himalaya, where I was backpacking after my military service. I went backpacking in the Himalaya. And while I was backpacking, I met an Israeli guy who was sitting in the guest house, in a cheap guest house in the Himalayas. And he wasn't communicating at all. He just sat there and he stared all the time. He looked in some kind of shock. And after a while, I became a bit worried, and I came to him and I asked him if everything was okay. And he told me that a few days earlier, he was riding his motorcycle in the Himalayas, and he accidentally hit a local man, a beggar, an Indian beggar. And he was afraid to be caught by the police. He was afraid to go to the Indian prison, who's notorious. And he was supposed to come back to Israel and to start the university. He just finished the army. He panicked and he ran away. He left the man on the side of the road and he ran away. And ever since, he was just sitting like this, freezing. And I remember when I heard the story, I was very young. I was in my 20s. And I thought, he doesn't look like the concept that I have of a bad man. I mean, he looked like a good guy. He was carrying, he had a guitar on his shoulders, and he had a Gabriel Garcia Marquez novel, and, he was a good Israeli guy. And I looked at him and I thought, he doesn't look like the kind of man who could do such a thing. And I was haunted by the story for years before I sat down to write it, because I thought, how come a man that was not raised to be a bad person can do such a thing in a split of moment decision? I asked myself how much this decision defines him as a person. Who is he more, the person he was for 20 years, or the guy that did the split of a second decision and left the man by the side of the road? But what also haunted me was the question of, had this guy hit a girl like me in the Himalaya, if he was riding his motorcycle and hit another Israeli girl in India, would he be able to leave me on the side of the road? Or is the fact that the man that he hit was of different color, of different nationality, wasn't Jewish, didn't speak the same language, did race had a role in his decision? And I asked myself this question for quite a long time. And then I felt that I have to sit down and write this story. But I did not want to write it based in the Himalaya. I thought I want to move the location from India, where it actually happened, back to Israel, back to my country. And I thought that this guy that will do the hit and run accident would be an Israeli doctor, because for me, doctors are, they're like the reincarnation of God upon earth. That's the way we treat doctors, at least in Israel. Every Jewish mother wants a doctor in her family. And because we used to think of doctors as good people, and the doctor in Waking Lions think of himself as a good man. He lives in Sheva in the desert. He helps the people. He helps rural communities who come to Sheva Hospital. He votes left wing. He's a liberal, and liberals usually like to think of themselves as good people. And he likes to think of himself as a good person until the moment comes when he goes back home after a long night shift at Sheva hospital, when he accidentally hits an illegal migrant from Eritrea who was standing on the side of the road. And it took me a while to decide that I want the man he hits to be an illegal migrant. I was working for the Israeli civil rights movement, and I got to work a bit with the Eritrean community in the south of Tel Aviv. And what touched me the most while working with this community was how unseen these people are in the Israeli society. So we have asylum seekers who come from Eritrea and come from Sudan, come from Africa, and they reach Israel through the desert. They walk through Egypt, through the Sinai desert, and then they escape, they steal the border, and they enter the state of Israel. And I thought, what would happen if this Israeli doctor would accidentally hit an illegal migrant, somebody who is not just unseen in the moment of the accident, he's unseen in a much deeper aspect, in the metaphorical aspect, because these are the unseen people in our community. They clean our tables in the restaurants in Tel Aviv where I live. They work in the kitchens of the restaurant, they work in the supermarkets, they pack our groceries, but we don't talk to them. We don't know their names. We never stop to actually communicate with them. If you're from the right wing, you think that they shouldn't be in Israel at all. And if you're from the left wing, then you think they're all victims, but you still don't see them as people, as individuals. They are the victims, which is in a way just as dehumanizing to call everyone a victim as it is to call everyone a demographic threat, which is the way some people treat the Eritrean community. Because you don't talk about people, you talk about, a symbol. So in the story of Waking Lions, we have an Israeli doctor who comes back home after a long night shift, and he accidentally hit this Eritrean migrant. And he makes a decision. He decides to leave him there on the side of the road and go back home to his family, to his wife, to his kids. When I wrote Waking Lions, I was pregnant. So I thought to myself, as a mother, if I was driving back home in the middle of the night and I wanted to get back home to my kids, to my baby, am I absolutely sure that I wouldn't be capable to do such a thing, to leave a man on the side of the road, just for the chance to get back and be there for my kids in the morning? So I thought about this moment of the accident, the moment when he chooses to leave the man as the side of the road, as an existential moment, as a moment when someone is facing a decision that really reveals his true nature. He has the story of who he thinks he is, what kind of person he thinks he is, what does he think he's capable of doing. And then he faces the decision and he does something completely different. He runs away and he leaves the migrant by the side of the road, and he thinks that this is it. And I wrote this first chapter, and then I told my partner, my husband, that I'm writing this story. And I told him that this is what happens in the story and that I stopped. And he told me, okay, it's a nice beginning, but please do not write a full novel, like a 400-page novel, about a white guy who runs over a black guy and feels really guilty about it in his living room. And I said, why not? And he said, well, first, we already have a novel about somebody killing somebody and feeling really, really guilty about it. It's called Crime and Punishment. It's a huge bestseller. I'm sure you heard about it. He said, don't write a novel that was already written. But the second thing he said, and that really got me, he said, because it's too easy. It's too easy to sit in your living room and feel really, really guilty about something. Guilt is something that we all learn to live with. So this guy in the Himalaya, he hit the beggar, he felt shocked, maybe during the year of his life, 2 years of his life. But eventually he got home, he probably got married, he got a life. And he said, guilt is sometimes, it's like, you know, the bag that people carry. So each lady has a purse and she carries it, and it's heavy and it's not comfortable and it makes us walk a little bit like this, but we carry it. We can go on our entire life carrying this bag of guilt, and we'll survive it. He said, if you're really going to write the story, then it has to be not just the inner guilt, which is in a way self-indulging in guilty feelings. He said it has to be an outside threat. There has to be an outside eye. Somebody must have seen him. And then I thought about the wife of the refugee. I thought, what if the wife of the refugee was there? What if he thought that there was no witness, but there actually was a witness? And what if the witness was this woman that we never see because she's part of the unseen communities of the Eritreans? So it's not just that he doesn't see her, it's that in the deeper meaning, we do not see these people. And then I thought about this woman that witnessed the car accident. And all of a sudden, because she's unseen, because she's in the bottom of the Israeli food chain, she gets this power over the Israeli doctor. So the Israeli doctor, the white, Ashkenazi, secular, liberal Israeli doctor who has it all, who has the nice house, the nice working, who has everything, is suddenly completely in the hands of this Eritrean woman who has nothing, who is completely unseen in the Israeli society. And that's the moment when the character of Sirkit, the refugee, was born. And she comes to the house of the doctor and she knocks on his door the day after the accident. And he realizes that she was there. He thinks that she wants money. He thinks that she's going to blackmail him for his money. But he soon realizes that it's not money she wants, or at least it's not just money she wants. And this woman, Sirkit, she starts blackmailing the Israeli doctor to give medical help to refugees in the Israeli desert who are afraid to go to Sheva hospital because they're afraid that when they get out of the hospital, the immigration police will be waiting outside of the hospital to take them into custody. So they fear to seek medical help. And she says, if you want me to keep your secret, you will have to come to a deserted garage in the middle of the desert near Kibbutz Tlalim. You will have to come to this deserted garage and give medical treatment to all those people that you never bothered to look at. And because he's in her hand, he has no other choice but to agree to this blackmail. And what interested me while writing this story was, is it going to be a redemption story? That is, will the doctor change? He's blackmailed to do so, but this is also his salvation because he's forced to open his eyes and to look at Israel that he never dared to look at before. Those people in the desert, they were there all the time, but he never actually bothered to sit down and look at them. And I think maybe part of your mission, where if you were to come to Israel, I think part of your journey is exactly so, if I understand Arya's mission. It's about going to see aspects of the Israeli society, of modern Israel, that are often neglected, that we'd like to keep in our backyard, the backyard of our consciousness, because they're not always nice to look at. This is not the Israel that my grandfathers dreamt for me when they fought in the War of 48. I think they never would have imagined that the country would look this way today. And so he's forced to look at the other side of the Israeli society. He's forced to look into the desert, into the deserted areas of the consciousness. And this is the worst thing that ever happened to him. But at the same time, this is the moment that he wakes up as a human, that he stops being, in a way, an automat, and starts to think and to feel and to be more alive than he ever was. And what kept bothering me was this question of, had this refugee woman disappeared, if Sirkit would disappear, if a lightning would come and kill her in page 100, would he keep on going to this garage to help those people? Has he changed from the inside? Is it really a redemption novel? Or if he would magically disappear and he will be free from this outside power that chases him, if this would happen, will he just go back to his former life? Will he choose to be blind again? Will he forget all the things he saw? You know, like somebody who wakes up from a terrible, terrible dream and just goes on to his day and tries to forget the dream and tries to forget that the bad dream is actually the reality. Would you want me to open it up for questions, or should I keep on talking a little bit more?
Let's start with a few questions, and maybe we'll go back into it, because you've for many people who haven't read the book, you've now kind of set the stage for what the book is about. So let me ask you a few questions. Why did you name the book Waking Lions?
I was really curious by the idea that we all have a lion inside of us, a predator, a hidden predator inside of us. But we usually don't think about ourselves as predators. We usually think about ourselves as victims. So being Jewish, I usually think about myself as a victim of history. I don't think about myself as a victimizer of other communities. But also, you know, in everyday life, people usually, I'm a psychologist, so people usually come to my clinic. And most of the people, and me myself, when I go to my therapy, talk about themselves as the victims of circumstances or as the victims of other people. So I had a huge fight with my boss. I'm the victim and my boss is terrible. And if I had a huge fight with my worker, I'm still the victim and my worker is trying to exploit me. And if I had a fight with my mom, then my mom is the predator. And if I had a fight with my kids, then my kids are trying to eat me alive and I don't have a moment of my own. So we always think about ourselves as the victim. And I thought that this is the moment that the Israeli doctor actually realizes that he is not just a victim. He also has the power to hit somebody else and to leave him on the side of the road. But I also thought about Sirkit, the Eritrean refugee. And I thought about this woman who used to be in the bottom of the Israeli food chain, but suddenly she gets all this power. What will this power do to her? Will she be more moral, more generous, more compassionate than other people in position of power because she knows what it is to be a victim? Or could it be that when this Eritrean woman suddenly gets all this power, even if she starts as a very compassionate character, the power will transform her into a lion and something will awaken inside of her, something that starts perhaps in a very heroic way, but soon she is captivated by power, I think, like everybody else.
But why did you choose the names for the characters? Why did you choose her name as Sirkit and his name is Eitan Green? Any particular reason for those names?
Eitan in Hebrew, any of you speak Hebrew? Do you know what Eitan means? Eitan? Well, Eitan means okay. Did I get Eitan means strong. And it's a very common Hebrew name, strong, solid. Nachal Eitan is a river that floods all the year. Nachal Achzav is a dry river. So the desert is actually full with dry rivers that only fill up with water when we have a whole lot of rain, which is pretty rare. And Nachal Eitan is a river that will always have water inside. So it means it's very steady and solid and strong. And I thought about how we all have a concept of what kind of person we are. And we all like to think about ourselves as good people. And Eitan Green, my protagonist, this doctor, also, he thinks he knows who we are. And I think that's a sort of hubris. That's the sin of pride that we have, is that we think we really know ourselves. And we think we really know what we're capable of. And then this solid, steady, stable guy thinks that he has a very clear personality, the personality of a good person, suddenly realizes that he's capable of doing completely different things than everything he ever dreamed of. And I also wanted the reader to ask himself, if I was facing the same situation, driving back home in the middle of the night, hitting someone, am I absolutely sure that I know what my reaction would be? And of course, we have the right answer to this question, the answer that we give in daylight. But sometimes the answer that people give in daylight is different than the decision that they take in the middle of the night when no one is watching. I was really curious about what are we capable of doing if nobody is watching us? Because my girl, I was pregnant when I was writing with the novel, but since then she got out. And she's now in this age when if I'm in the room, she will never hit her younger brother. But if there's nobody watching and I leave the room for just 2 minutes, then you would hear, you know, the screaming coming from the living room, because her moral standards only exist under the open eye of her mother. If there's no open eye, no moral standards. And as we grow up, the open eye of the mother is internalized, so that even when our mother is gone, we still feel her eye inside of us telling us, don't do that. But sometimes in the middle of the night, the eye of the mother blinks. The inner eye, the moral eye, blinks. And that's what happened to Eitan. And he realizes that he's not so Eitan anymore. And with Sirkit, I chose her name because I asked a friend who works with the Eritrean community to help me find the right name. And I like this name, she suggested, because it has the name it echoes a bit something of a secret. And I think there is something secret in this woman. There is something that Eitan just doesn't seem to understand. Her complexity, the idea that she's not, at first she was unseen to him, then he thinks about her as a threat, then he thinks about her as a saint. But as I said earlier, a saint is not a complicated character. It doesn't have layers. It doesn't have psychological depth. When we think about somebody as a saint, he's not more human than when we think about him as a devil. And when Eitan realizes that Sirkit is not just a saint, she's not a black Moses coming to help her people, she also has other interests involved, he's so angry at her. And he's so angry because she's not the person he thought she is. And I think this is something interesting, how we want the refugees to represent something, to either be, you know, the threat or to be the saints. And we don't usually think about an Eritrean woman as capable for everything that the Israeli man is capable of, which is for the best, but also for the worst of them.
Why did you choose Beersheba as the location? I mean, I don't want to give away, we talk a lot about the book. People who haven't read it should know that the doctor is not in Beersheba because he wants to be in Beersheba. I think he has to be in Beersheba because something happens in his practice in Tel Aviv. So why did you choose Beersheba as the location? And did you go research, has Beersheba changed? Because we're going to Beersheba this afternoon, right? Has Beersheba changed a lot over the years? Have you spent a lot of time there, or did you just choose it as a location because it was a plot line?
I actually lived in Beersheba for a year. Before I joined the IDF, I did a year of community volunteer in Beersheba, and I worked with youth. Do you call it youth in stress, or from deprived neighborhoods?
Right.
So I lived a year in Beersheba. And it was, when I lived there, it was a very difficult city. I grew up in Tel Aviv, in a upper class neighborhood, you would say, good socioeconomical background. Everybody I knew went to high school, and everybody I knew went to the army. And after that, they were planning to go to the university. And so this was my year out of the bubble. And I remember that it affected me quite a lot, like meaning Beersheba, seeing not just Beersheba, but also the desert around Beersheba. Because if you open Google Maps right now and open Beersheba and look around, I don't know, maybe it changed during the years, but at least when I wrote Waking Lions, you would see Beersheba, you would see the kibbutzes, but then the Negev would seem empty on Google Maps. It would look empty. But when you look into the desert, when you actually go there, you see that it's not empty at all. It's full of people, but these are just people that are not in the maps. These are the unrecognized Bedouin villages in the Israeli desert. These are Kan Cholot, where Eritrean refugees were put in detention when they escaped the border. But you didn't see it in the atlas, you didn't see it in the map, because these were the people that we didn't stop to think about when we drew the maps. And when I got to Be'er Sheva, and I really like hiking, so I started hiking the desert. And then you start meeting the other people in the desert, the people that I never knew that existed. So it was very clear to me that Waking Lions will be set in this backyard of the Israeli mentality, because I thought Be'er Sheva is the ex-territory of Israel. It's not Yerushalayim or Haifa or Tel Aviv. It's not even Natzrat or Akko when you still have the tourists. It's something very, very different. And I knew that the novel will have to be there, not just because this is the first city, Be'er Sheva and Arad, where the African refugees get once they cross the border, but also because I think metaphorically, Be'er Sheva is a city that many people in Israel don't want to remember, don't want to think about. And I wanted Waking Lions to be a novel about the things that usually we don't want to look at and we don't want to think about.
And that's actually the very reason we're going to Be'er Sheva, is because on our trip, we're digging deeper in Israel. So we want to understand, I think the beauty of Israel is its complexity. It's not in its simplicity. And what we read in the news is very simple issues and controversies, but there's a lot more going on and a lot more interesting people who live in Israel, legally and illegally. What was the reaction to your book in Israel? And was it, in the different segments of the population? Did people read it in Israel? And if so, what kind of reactions did you get from the different parts of society?
It was very interesting, the different reactions. I got a reporter that told me that when he read the novel, he kept wishing that Eitan will get away with it. He thought, I just wanted him to be safe. Maybe it's because he's like me. I'm a white guy from the upper class, and he's a white guy from the upper class. He has kids. I have kids. I just wanted him to be safe in the end. I didn't want his wife to find out. I didn't want him to lose his job. I was hoping for a good ending. And then I asked him, so what's your concept of a good ending? I mean, is a good ending the situation when the white guy gets away with it because we identify with him so much? Is that what we think about a good ending? Or is a good ending a situation when somebody has to face the responsibility of his actions? So that was a reaction that I really remember because it shocked me. I got a very interesting reaction actually in the States when I was in Carleton College. I met a professor of literature who hosted me. And she immigrated to the US from Sweden, and before that she came from Eritrea. And she told me, you know what, if I stayed in Israel, then I wouldn't be a professor in the university today, because you don't have any Eritrean refugees attending university in Israel. They do have some projects sponsored by NGOs trying to get people to the university, and she said, and here I'm a professor. And it really shocked me. I think it was one of the most shocking encounters that I had. Some people in Israel said that you shouldn't write about these aspects of Israeli culture, because afterwards people in the world would say bad things about Israel. And I did get, when Waking Lions was translated into, I think it was in Italy, a very annoying response from a journalist talking about, asking me if all Israelis are racist, which really bothered me because I thought he misread the entire, and I told him that he misread the entire story, because the story is not about those racist Israelis. The novel is about trying to ask yourself, what are you as a person capable of doing, and what is every Western country capable of doing? and asking how far will we go to keep our way of living. It's not about those Israelis. I think whenever somebody reads a novel about those Israelis, he's missing something. Instead of seeing the novel as a mirror, as something that faces a question in front of you, you use the novel to peep into your own prejudice. I was really annoyed by that.
For those who don't know what's going on in Israel with illegal immigrants coming in, can you give us just a quick primer as to who these people are, because they're from different countries, and what's going on, particularly right now during COVID, with them?
It changed a lot since Waking Lines was published. So we had, when Waking Lines was written, we had quite a lot of immigrants coming from mostly Eritrea and South Sudan, crossing the border through the Sinai Desert. So walking the Sinai Desert, you had the Bedouin groups in the Sinai Desert who was keeping them in what was called torture camps. So they would catch people, and then they would call their relatives who already got to Israel, tell the relatives that if they don't pay ransom, then they would rape people or hurt them or kill them. And then the people in Israel gave all the saving that they already got to get their the people that they know out of the torture camps in Sinai and get them into Israel. So as a psychologist, I know a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist, for instance, had a clinic in Tel Aviv to treat PTSD among Eritrean people who came from Sinai, especially women who were raped. Some of them actually came pregnant with kids that they didn't have abortion, and then they had the kids, and you had a lot of maternal depression after birth because these are kids who were conceived in rape. And the situation was that people who got to Israel couldn't deport them because we signed the UN treaty for refugees. So we couldn't deport them back to their countries, but we didn't want to give them the legal status because the government was afraid that then all of Africa would come into Israel. So what the government did is that they had to file a request to be acknowledged as refugees, and deliberately to wait with those requests so that they won't get the status of a refugee. From all the requests that were given, only less than 1% were approved. From all of the requests of people coming from Eritrea.
How many people are we talking about? Do you have a number?
We're talking about, back then we were talking about 100 people, then it was 70,000 people, then it was 40,000 people. Israel since then built a huge fence on the border with Sinai to prevent more people to penetrate from this border. So right now we don't have more people coming. And the question is, what shall we do with the people who are already here? About 2 years ago, when I was in the States, Netanyahu signed with 3 states in Africa. One of them is Uganda. I think it was Uganda, Rwanda, I don't remember which one was the third country, an agreement saying that we can deport refugees to these countries because you can't deport them to Eritrea because it's in a state of war. So they wanted to report them to that Kenya, to Beth Broadway, to deport them to other African countries which are not in a state of war, and then you can deport them to a country which is not in a state of war because you can't return a refugee to his own country as long as he's under threat there. So they were deported to 3 countries. They couldn't be forcefully, you can't deport them by force, but they would say that you can't get back your savings from the bank unless you sign that you are willing to go to one of the 3 countries in Africa. It was later canceled, this agreement, so right now it's canceled. You had the Cholot and Saronim, which are both places where refugee seekers were put under custody so that they won't get to Tel Aviv. Most of the community today is based in the southern part of Tel Aviv, in Shchunat Hatikva, which is a very poor neighborhood. And there was a big debate about it inside the Israeli society, because many people at Shkunat Hatikva would tell you that this is a source of crime. And they say, to people like me, they say, if you like the refugees so much, you can take them to the north of Tel Aviv, to the more, to the economically high neighborhood. You can put them there and see how you feel. And other people say that it's our job as a nation of refugees to be more tolerant and more merciful to people who are now refugees. So it's quite a big debate in the Israeli society.
Let's switch gears, and then we'll end by going back to your book with some final questions. But can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you became a writer? Were you always interested in writing? Did you always read? Or is that kind of a later development?
I will tell about my background, and I will say one thing, because I see you write things in the chat, and because my English is not so good, I can't read and talk at the same time. So maybe I'm missing very important messages. So Ali, I trust you to go through them and tell me if so, okay? Because I just can't read and talk at the same time.
No, I am. I'm reading the chat.
So I grew up in Tel Aviv. My family is from all over Europe. Some of them were in Kibbutz Goshen and Kibbutz Ayelet. Some came right after Second World War. I started writing in a very, very young age, but I didn't dream of being an author. It looked to me like some kind of, like something that you won't even dare to dream about. And it took me quite a long time to get the courage and decide that I do want to try and publish my work and sit down and write a novel. I'm also a psychologist, so I trained as a psychologist while I was writing my first novel. And I feel that the two different fields really interweave in a nice way, because I think when you're a psychologist, you always try to understand what make people be who they are and do what they do. So I quite often, when I write a novel, I take for instance, Eitan, the Israeli doctor, I took him to my clinic in a way, and I asked myself, if he would come into your clinic, then you can't just say, you're a terrible man, you did a hit and run accident, I mean, you're a villain, get out of here. You have to try to understand him. You have to try to understand what made him do what he did. And I think the joint question of both psychology and literature is to try to realize what makes people do the things they do, and how far a person is willing to go. And I think they also both have the humanistic question of human nature and the capacity of change. When we read a novel, we always ask ourselves, will this man change by the end of the novel, or will he stay the same as he was in the first chapter? And I think this is also something that we ask ourselves about our own life. Am I able to change? Can I still behave differently? Can I still surprise myself with my reaction to my partner, to my kids, to my partner, to my parents, or will I always be trapped in saying the same things, going over the same fights, doing the same reactions again and again?
But since that's your profession, what's the answer to that question? What are most of us going to do?
I think the beautiful thing is that there is no most of us. I think that's what I like the most about literature and psychology, that I'm thinking about tomorrow I'm going to go to my clinic, I'm going to meet 10 different people, and I have no idea what's going to happen, because these are 10 different people and each one of them is a universe. And I think the moments that I like the most in therapy, but also in literature, is when somebody surprises me. But it's not because Deus ex machina, it's not arbitrary. When something surprises you because a person is capable of doing more than what you thought he's capable, to show more compassion than you ever dreamed of. And sometimes we surprise ourselves because we are more cruel than we ever thought that we could be. This is also an interesting moment in therapy and in literature, because it's the moment when the concept of who is me and what am I capable of doing suddenly shakens. And then usually we choose very interesting words. We say, I don't know if you said in English, do we say, it's like a demon inside of me? Or I don't know what happened to me today. I wasn't myself today. You use it also in English, right? We use it very commonly in Hebrew. We say, it wasn't me, I wasn't myself. It was like a demon. It was like external. It was the other me. We use the language to separate ourselves from things that we do, from decisions that we make. They don't fit with the concept that we have of who we are. We do it as people. We do it as a nation. We suppress our ability to hurt others. We don't like to think about it. And when it happens, we say this, it wasn't me, or this demon, or this, because we fail again and again to recognize the scope of possibilities of behavior that we are capable of.
When you wrote this book and your other two books, which I want to get to in a second, do you write as an Israeli? Do you write as a Jewish person? Do you write as a Jewish Israeli? What do you bring from your identity to your writing?
I grew up in my family wasn't religious at all, but it was a very biblical loving family. So it was a secular family, but I really grew up in a family that talks and fights and argues about the Bible all the time. So in Yom Shishi, they would argue, my mom and my grandma would argue about who is the most interesting character, David or Shaul, for instance. You say Saul in English, right? So they will always argue about that. And it made me feel as if the biblical characters are in a way living in our living room on daily basis. So, Cain and Abel, when you have this terrible story about a brother killing the other brother, I remember thinking about, I grew up in a family of 3 sisters, and we were all competing all the time over the love of the parents. And I remember how if my mother gave her love to one of us and didn't give her love to the others, you had a little Cain and Abel scene in the living room with the other sisters looking at the chosen one. So I always felt in a way that being Jewish and growing up on the Bible plays a role in the way I think about the world, in the way I think about the psychology of people, because I think the Bible is the best textbook for psychology, and also in the way I try to write literature. So I'm always thinking about it, that when I write today something in Hebrew, I'm writing in a language that existed so many years ago, and that was dead for such a long time. It was dead, meaning, as Amos Oz said, it was a dead language because people prayed in this language, but no boy told a girl that he loves her in this language, Beivrit, for so many years. And then it wasn't dead, it was a sleeping beauty, and then it woke up. And the idea that we can write today in this language, so for me, I feel very much as a Jewish Israeli author. At the same time, when a novel is translated to other languages, for instance, with my last novel, it's called The Liar. I don't have Waking Lines here, but I have The Liar. So when The Liar was translated, we had a residency of all the translators from all over the world. They came to Jerusalem, to Mishkenot Sha'ananim. Mishkenot Sha'ananim is a beautiful place in Jerusalem, and they have residencies of translators. And they came, and we all sat together, all the translators from different countries they never visited. And even though I think about myself as an Israeli Jewish author, it was amazing for me to meet those translators and realize that for them, the story is universal. It's not a story about, also with Waking Lions, it's not a story about a racist Israeli, because the doctor could just as well be an Italian doctor driving back home and hitting a refugee. It could be a German doctor. It could be a French doctor. And right now we're doing an adaptation of Waking Lions in France. So we're talking about a French doctor. And for me, this idea that a very Israeli local story can also be a universal story has something to do with humanism, was the idea that people vary in language, in color, in culture, but people can still identify through literature with other peoples, with people that they never met, with people that they don't speak their language, with people that we think about as enemies. But when we read their stories, we realize that their stories they can touch our heart because they share the same humanistic mechanism.
So I assume then you write all your stories in Hebrew, correct? And then they get translated?
Okay.
So, but you read English. So when you read this version that we have in English, because everything when you translate you don't necessarily, you can't keep the same word choice. I assume you choose words carefully, and there's certain words in Hebrew that have resonance for a variety of reasons, but in English they may be different. So when you read it in English or another language, do you feel that something's been lost in the translation, or do you think it's just as good or good in a different way?
That's a very good question that I'm afraid I can't fully answer because I do not read in English. The last book I read in English was Harry Potter for a book assignment in high school. So because I love Hebrew so much, I really can't enjoy literature in English. My English, I'm afraid, is not good enough to really admire and enjoy the music in English. But you're right that it's very, very delicate, this situation. I will give you an example. The wife of the doctor, there's an Israeli doctor who hits the refugee, there's the wife of the refugee who blackmails him, and there's the wife of the Israeli doctor who is a police detective. And she investigates. Do you want to guess, those of you who haven't read the novel? I'm sure you can guess because you saw HBO and Netflix, you know this cliche. The woman investigates the hit and run accident without knowing that the hit and runner is actually the man she's married to. And I chose this cliche, this mechanism, not just because I wanted the plot to be interesting, but also because I felt there's something very true. In cliches, I think they always have this truth embedded in them. That's what makes them return themselves again and again. It's like a gene that repeats again and again because it carries something important. And I think it carries the idea that we can be married to someone and love someone and think that we know this person, but at the same time, we are completely blind to certain elements of this person. And we choose to be blind to these elements in order to keep on loving him. Just the way we choose to be blind to certain elements of our own children because we want to give them the loving gaze of a parent. And we don't dare to look at them as they really are because we don't want to see their flaws, which might be ours. And just like we don't want to look at our parents with our eyes wide open, we choose to be blind again and again. So that's why I wanted his wife to be a police detective who tries to investigate this, but in a way chooses to be blind to her own husband and to what he did. She's such a bad detective until a certain moment in the novel. And when the novel was translated, I think it was both the US translator, Sandra, but also a translator from Europe who approached me and said, you have a problem because whenever the police detective talks with her boss, she talks to him in such an, do you say direct way? Do you say direct when it's like impolite and the way Israelis talk?
Yes.
Like she doesn't say sir, not even once. She interrupts him in the, and it was, I think the Holland, the translator from the Netherlands, she said she has to call him in a third person. You know, in German, they call people in a third person. And he's her boss, so she has to call him in a third person. And I said, we don't have third person in Israel. We are the most direct people in the world. She doesn't talk like this to her boss. And the translator said, but if she will talk to her boss the way she does in the novel, then people will think she's a very rude person. They wouldn't understand that this is a cultural difference and that she's not disrespectful to her boss. This is just the way we talk. We do respect our bosses. We're afraid of being fired just like anyone else. But she said people will not understand that. They will think that she is specifically rude. So I will have to give her in the translation, she will have to call him sir. She can't say of course every 2 minutes, because to say of course is considered rude. In Israel, it's considered a nice way to save your time if I say of course. So we had all these sessions of translations that I can't really judge, because I'm coming from my culture. I can't see I can't see my own nose. I need a translator to see it for me.
A few quick last questions before we end. We had a writer on in a different context, not on our Israel trip, who talked about her book that just got published. It took her 26 years. She wrote other stuff in between. How long did it take you to write this book and your other books in general? Do you write them very quickly, or does it take a long time?
With Waking Lions, I wrote the first draft really, really fast. And the first draft was completely from the eyes of Eitan, from the eyes of the doctor. He faces this problem with this woman. She blackmails him. He doesn't know what to do. It was all from his eyes. And then I felt something is missing. And then I got stuck. And I thought, the missing thing is her perspective. I want to write the perspective of the Eritrean woman who blackmails him, because I don't want to write the whole novel from his eyes when she's just the object, either the object of his fears or the object of his desire, but she's not a person because we keep seeing her from his eyes. And then I talked to my editor and he said, this is a very bad idea. You're a white woman. You cannot write from the eyes of a Black refugee. You're a white girl from Tel Aviv. How dare you write from the eyes of a Black refugee? And then I got even more stuck. And then I realized that I did.
Oh, you're frozen.
Okay. Is to say, I'm sorry?
You're back. You were frozen just for a second. You're back.
Just for a second? Okay.
Yeah.
So after I got terribly stuck, it took me about a year of being stuck. I realized that I do want to write circuit from within. I want to have paragraphs and chapters which are completely from Circuit's point of view. And I thought that to say that a white man cannot write from the perspective of a Black man, to say that a woman cannot write from the perspective of a man, that a Jew cannot write from the perspective of a Christian, or to say the other way around, is for me exactly the opposite than what I think literature is all about. I think literature is about both the reader, is about trying to put yourself in the shoe of the other. When you read a novel, you identify with somebody who is not you, and you try to understand the world from the eyes of somebody who is not you. And even if you fail to do so, I'd rather try and fail than to say something like a white Jewish girl can only write a white Jewish girl. I think this is missing the idea, of empathy, of humanism, of trying to realize, coming from a nation of refugee, where can I link, where can I imagine myself again as a refugee? And then I sat down and wrote Circuit's perspective, and then the novel was done.
How long did that take?
Is the short answer. So
how long did it take from beginning to end to write this book?
3 years. And
how long did it take to write your other books, each book?
With The Liar, what you don't see in The Liar is you don't see my girl who was born, and you don't see how I had, well, because everybody who was a parent knows that. But The Liar took a long time. It took 4.5 years. It was competing with motherhood. And that was the moment when I realized why for so many years you didn't have women writing literature. I don't think it's because we didn't have talented writers 100 years ago. I think it's because if you're to be only a mother, you almost don't have the time to write one page.
How long did it take for the first book, One Night Markovitch?
One Night Markovitch, 2 years, 2.5 years.
Okay. So before we end, are you working on your next book right now? And what's it about?
I just finished my next book. It's being translated right now with the same translator of Waking Lions. It's about relocating to America It's called Relocation, and it's about an Israeli family relocating to America, a clash of identity between their Israeli identity and between the global identity that they try to keep. But
So we hope to have you back then to talk about the new book.
I hope to have
published.
you here to talk about it.
Okay.
To talk about the new book.
Let's end with the following. Do your characters change at the end of Waking? Where are they now? Waking Lions. The book ends. The movie's over. I don't know if they're making a movie about this. Where are they now? Are they, you know?
That's the most to ask an author, because after you spend 3 years with the characters, you really don't want to leave them, and you keep, they become part of your family. Ask yourself again and again, did I finish the book too soon, because I still want to be with them. But I think for Silky, something did wake up inside of her, because she got all this power and she changed so dramatically from being this unseen refugee woman to having all this power. I didn't reveal the end, but the end faces her was, I think, the biggest challenge she ever faced. And with Eitan, I asked myself exactly this question all the way till the ending. I asked myself, will he go back to be the same blind person he was before, as a chosen blindness? Or this experience truly changed him from within, so that today he will never be able to hit somebody and leave him in the side of the road? And I'm not.
You're not going to answer. Okay. Well, and did you ever find out what happened with that person in India that you met? Did you ever?
No.
No. Well, I guess that's life. Life is not clean. Life is messy. And since we're all here, we haven't got to our endings yet. But I do want to thank everybody. And I want to thank Ayelet for taking time to be with us from Tel Aviv and taking us to the desert. If you haven't read the books, or the particular book, Waking Lions, the other ones, please do. We look forward to your new book coming out. And we'll be in touch. And thank you, everybody. We'll see you in the desert in about an hour and a half or less than that. Okay?
Litrot, enjoy the rest of your online trip.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Go get some water. Take a rest. We're going on a walking tour in Beersheba. Thank you again, Ayelet.
Litrot.
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.